It took one clinical pharmacist, 26 years old, still paying off her student loans, to find what 3 board-certified specialists had missed inside a hospital that officially didn't exist on any public registry. The 7th floor of St. Aurelius Medical Center in Miami operated under a different set of rules than the floors below it. There were no visiting hours posted on the door. There was no receptionist behind the glass. The men who stood at either end of the corridor wore tailored jackets that didn't move naturally when they breathed because of what was underneath. Patients on the 7th floor didn't fill out insurance forms. They paid in other ways, and the hospital asked no questions about how. Lennox Breyer had been assigned to that floor 11 weeks ago, and she still hadn't figured out how to feel about it. She had applied to St. Aurelius the same way she'd applied everywhere else, through the standard portal, with her transcript from the University of Florida and a cover letter she'd revised 14 times. The pharmacy director had called her back within 24 hours. The salary he offered was nearly twice what the position should have paid. Lennox had been 3 months behind on rent. She said yes before he finished the sentence. No one told her about the 7th floor until her 3rd week, when a charge nurse named Daphne pulled her aside in the break room and said, simply, "Mr. Vale's medication reconciliation is your responsibility now. Holloway's been handling it, but he's being reassigned. You'll be fine." "Who is Mr. Vale?" Lennox had asked. Daphne had looked at her the way you look at someone who just asked what gravity is. "You'll figure it out," she said, and walked away. She figured it out. Ronan Vale was 41 years old. He had a jaw that looked like it had been cut from something expensive and eyes the color of water over stones. Not quite grey, not quite green, and not particularly warm. He ran something that the newspapers sometimes called an import logistics organization, and that the FBI periodically attempted to call other things, with limited success. He had been admitted to the 7th floor 18 days ago with acute kidney dysfunction, following what his chart described as a workplace incident involving blunt trauma. The chart did not describe the workplace. No chart on the 7th floor ever did. When Lennox first walked into room 712 to conduct his medication review, Vale had been sitting up in bed, redigging a document she could tell from across the room was not a get-well card. He hadn't looked up. "New pharmacist," she said, because she'd already learned that announcing yourself mattered on this floor. "I know," he said, still reading. "Breyer, University of Florida, top of your class. Applied to 9 hospitals. We paid best." He turned a page. "Sit down, Miss Breyer. This will take a while." She didn't sit. She conducted the review standing up, which she later understood he had noted. That had been 8 days ago. The problem started on a Tuesday. Lennox arrived at 6:45 in the morning, which was her habit, early enough to pull overnight charts before the day shift nurses needed her, early enough to catch errors before they became events. She made coffee in the pharmacy workroom, black, and opened Vale's file. She read it twice, then she pulled the previous 4 days of records and read those too. His creatinine levels were moving in the wrong direction. Not dramatically, not the kind of wrong that triggered an alarm or got flagged in the system. Just a subtle, persistent drift. 2 points here, 3 there. The kind of thing a busy resident might attribute to hydration variability, or dietary inconsistency, or a dozen other unremarkable explanations. Lennox didn't find it unremarkable. She had written her graduate thesis on nephrotoxic drug interactions in high-acuity patients. She had spent 2 years before that volunteering at a renal clinic in Gainesville, where she had watched, helplessly, as a 53-year-old man lost his kidney function because 3 different prescribing doctors hadn't noticed that 2 of his medications, individually harmless, clinically recommended, were quietly destroying each other inside his bloodstream. She knew what this pattern looked like. She had written 40 pages about it. She went back to Vale's medication list. Everything appeared correct. The tacrolimus dose was appropriate for his weight. The fluconazole had been discontinued last week as planned. The vancomycin trough levels were within range. On paper, there was nothing to see. She almost closed the file. Instead, she pulled the dispensing logs. The dispensing logs were not the same as the medication list. The medication list told you what a patient was supposed to receive. The dispensing logs told you what had actually been prepared and sent up from the pharmacy. In most cases, they matched exactly. In most hospitals, no one checked them against each other unless something had already gone wrong. Lennox checked them because she checked everything. It was not a quality she had chosen. It was simply the way her mind worked, a kind of low-grade compulsion for completeness that had made her unpopular at parties and exceptional at her job. The fluconazole had been discontinued on a Thursday. The dispensing log showed it going out on Friday morning. 1 dose. 1 extra dose sent to room 712 after the order had been cancelled. It could have been a processing delay. It could have been a technician who'd pulled the order before the cancellation hit the system. It could have been, and usually was, exactly that simple. Lennox flagged it and moved to the next item. The tacrolimus dosage in the dispensing log was 0.5 milligrams higher than the prescribed order. She stopped, she went back, she counted again. The prescribed dose was 2 milligrams. The dispensed dose, according to the log, was 2.5. The difference was small enough that a nurse, checking the label against the order, might not catch it without measuring precisely. Small enough that the computer system, which flagged on percentage deviation, had not tripped. Small enough, over the course of 5 days, to cause the exact kind of progressive renal impairment she was reading in his creatinine trend. Her hands were steady. She had always been good in the moments that required stillness. She printed both logs. She placed them side by side on the counter. She looked at them for a long time. Then she looked at who had processed the dispensing orders. The technician listed was named Crow. Patrick Crow, ID number ending in 441, 12 years with the pharmacy, no disciplinary record. She had worked alongside him 3 times this week. He was quiet and precise and had brought homemade tamales to the break room on Monday. She sat with that for a moment. Then she pulled every dispensing log from the past 2 weeks for room 712, organized them chronologically, and compared each one against the signed physician orders. The pattern appeared on day 9 of Vale's admission. Before day 9, every dispensed item matched its order perfectly. After day 9, there were 6 discrepancies, all small, all within the tacrolimus and supporting medication line, all trending in the same direction. None large enough to trigger an automatic alert. All enough accumulating to tip a recovering kidney toward failure. Someone had waited 9 days. Long enough for Vale to stabilize, to seem like he was improving, to lower the vigilance around him. Then they had started. Whoever had done this knew exactly how the monitoring systems worked. They knew the thresholds. They knew how to stay invisible inside the margins. Lennox looked at the logs again. Then she picked up her phone and called the overnight charge nurse. "Daphne," she said when the line picked up. "Who has access to the pharmacy queue for the 7th floor?" A pause. "Why? I need to know." Another pause, longer. "You, me, Holloway, Crow, and Dr. Sedgwick signs off on the controlled items. Why, Lennox? I need to pull the camera footage from the pharmacy workroom for the past 6 days. That goes through security. And security on 7 goes through." "I know who it goes through," Lennox said. "I'll handle it." She hung up. She sat in the workroom for exactly 90 seconds, which was as long as she allowed herself before making a decision she couldn't take back. Then she gathered her printed logs, put them in a folder, and took the elevator to the 7th floor. The man standing outside room 712 was named Rafferty Cole. Lennox had encountered him enough times to know that his name was not on any hospital roster, that he communicated primarily through expressions rather than words, and that he was the person Ronan Vale trusted most in any given building. He looked at her the way he always looked at her, assessing, categorizing, filing. "I need 5 minutes," she said. "He's sleeping. He needs to be awake for this." Something shifted in Rafferty's face, not alarm exactly, more like the recalibration of a very experienced instrument. He opened the door. Vale was not in fact sleeping. He was lying with his eyes closed, but they opened the moment she stepped in, and they were completely alert, which told her everything she needed to know about how he slept. "Miss Breyer," he said, "it's 7 in the morning." "I know." She placed the folder on the tray table beside his bed and opened it. "I need you to look at these." He didn't reach for them immediately. He looked at her first, a long, measuring look that she had learned over 8 days to simply receive without flinching. "You look like you haven't decided yet whether you've made a mistake coming here," he said. "I've decided," she said. "I wouldn't be here if I hadn't." He picked up the logs. She watched his face as he read them. It was a face that didn't give much away, but she had spent the better part of 2 weeks learning its minor registers, and she saw the exact moment, somewhere between the 2nd and 3rd page, when he understood what he was looking at. He set the papers down. "How long?" he asked. "The discrepancies begin 9 days into your admission, consistent with the beginning of your creatinine drift. How long until it becomes a problem that can't be explained away as natural progression?" She had already done that calculation. She had done it sitting in the workroom after she hung up with Daphne, and the number had sat cold in her chest ever since. "Based on the current trajectory," she said, "somewhere between 4 and 7 days." Vale was quiet for a moment. Outside the window, Miami was beginning to lighten, the sky going from black to a deep bruised purple over the bay. "Who are the first person I've told?" Why? It was the right question. She had expected it. Because whoever is doing this has access to the pharmacy queue, knows the monitoring thresholds, and knew to wait 9 days before starting, she said. That means they know how the system works, which means anyone inside the system could be compromised. I don't know who to trust on the clinical side, but I know that if something happens to you while you're a patient in this hospital, the first person anyone looks at is the pharmacist managing your medications. Vale looked at her for a long time. "You're protecting yourself," he said. "I'm protecting both of us," she said. "And I need to know if there's anyone on your side who can pull physical security footage without going through hospital channels." The corner of his mouth moved. It wasn't quite a smile. It was something more like recognition. "Rafferty," he said. "Rafferty Cole had the footage within 4 hours. They watched it in the workroom. Lennox, Rafferty, and a man named Sutton, who apparently handled things that Rafferty considered beneath his own job description. The footage was from the pharmacy preparation area, covering the past 8 days, and most of it was mundane. Technicians pulling orders, running counts, logging controlled substances. The work of a functioning pharmacy, ordinary and repetitive. On day 3 of the footage, which corresponded to day 12 of Vale's admission, 3 days after the discrepancies began. There was a 7-minute window at 2:43 in the morning during which the preparation counter was occupied by someone who was not Patrick Crowe. The figure wore a pharmacy ID badge and moved with the comfortable efficiency of someone who had done this before. They pulled the tacrolimus compound from the refrigerator, prepared the doses for the morning run, and logged them under Crowe's technician ID. They had timed it, Lennox realized, for a moment between Crowe's bathroom break and his return to the counter. 6 minutes and 40 seconds, enough time to prepare 2 days' worth of altered doses and enter them in the system before the camera angle shifted. The face was visible for approximately 3 seconds, partially turned near the end of the clip. Lennox recognized it. She had seen that face twice a week for 11 weeks, in the hallway outside the 7th floor nursing station, on rounds, at the physician sign-off terminal for controlled substances, Dr. Sedgwick. Jonah Sedgwick, MD. Nephrology. The physician who had been managing Vale's kidney recovery. The physician whose signature appeared on every controlled substance order for the 7th floor. The physician who had access to the prescribing system, the dispensing queue, and the monitoring thresholds, because he had helped build the monitoring protocol when the 7th floor was established. Lennox looked at the frozen frame on the screen for a long time. Then she said, "I need to know who Sedgwick reports to, outside the hospital." Rafferty and Sutton exchanged a look. "That's a longer conversation," Rafferty said. "Then let's have it." The longer conversation revealed several things that Lennox had not known, and would have preferred, in some ways, to continue not knowing. Sedgwick had been placed on the 7th floor by a man named Harlan Breck. Not a name she recognized, but one that made Rafferty's jaw tighten in a way she had not seen before. Breck ran a competing organization that had been trying to absorb Vale's territory for the better part of 2 years. He had apparently decided that legal and strategic methods were insufficient and had moved to something more definitive. Sedgwick had been on his payroll for 8 months. The plan, as Rafferty pieced it together from sources he did not name and she did not ask about, was elegant in its patience. Wait for Vale to sustain a genuine injury, and Vale's work being what it was. Genuine injuries were not improbable. Get Sedgwick positioned as his treating physician, and then engineer a slow, plausibly natural organ failure that would be recorded as a tragic complication of the original trauma. The kind of outcome that happened sometimes, even in good hospitals. The kind of outcome that prompted sympathy and a coroner's report and no further questions. They had waited 9 days because they needed Vale stable enough that his death would read as a sudden turn rather than an initial severity. A patient who died on day 2 looked like a bad injury. A patient who died on day 12 looked like bad luck. Lennox sat with all of this. "He's still on staff," she said. "He's going to sign off on today's pharmacy orders in approximately 2 hours. "Yes," Rafferty said. "If he's pulled off the floor suddenly, he'll know someone found him." "Yes," she thought. "I can change the actual doses without changing the dispensing log," she said. "If I prepare the medications myself and sub them out before they go up, he won't know the doses have been corrected. He'll think the plan is still working. It buys time." Rafferty looked at her with an expression she couldn't entirely decode. "You'd be falsifying dispensing records." "I'd be correcting medication doses for a patient who is actively being poisoned," she said. "I can document the actual preparation separately and timestamp it. If this ever goes to a regulatory board, the paper trail shows what actually happened. And if Sedgwick gets suspicious and checks the levels himself, creatinine doesn't reverse in 48 hours. Even with corrected doses, his levels will still look like they're declining for another day or 2. Sedgwick won't see anything out of place until it's too late for him to cover his tracks." Rafferty was quiet for a long moment. "You've thought about this a lot," he said. "I've been awake since 5, she said. "Yes." She worked through the morning, with her hands and her mind both steady, which was the only way she knew how to work. She corrected Vale's doses. She documented everything. Twice, in 2 separate systems, one of which she kept on a drive that did not connect to the hospital's network. She prepared the medications herself and flagged them for the nursing staff with a note that read Pharmacist review completed, confirmed by Breyer and her ID number. She went about the rest of her day. At 2:15 in the afternoon, Sedgwick walked into the pharmacy workroom. Lennox was at the counter running a coverage check on a different patient's anticoagulants. She heard him come in. She did not look up. "Miss Breyer," he said. His voice was pleasant. It was always pleasant. That was one of the things about him she had initially liked. The easy collegial warmth that she now understood had been practiced and deployed deliberately. "I wanted to check in on the Vale file. How are his numbers looking?" She pulled up the chart. She angled the screen so he could see it. "Creatinine trending at 2.4 this morning," she said. "Still elevated." Dr. Pemberton flagged it for nephrology review. She had, in fact, asked the internist on the floor to run a secondary review, a paper trail that did not originate with her. "We'll see what the 4 o'clock draw shows." Sedgwick looked at the numbers. She watched him read them the way she had watched Vale read the logs that morning, looking for the moment of registration. There it was, subtle, the slight relaxation of something that had been held tightly. "Keep an eye on it," he said. "These cases can turn quickly." "I know," she said. "I'll flag you if anything changes." He left. She turned back to the anticoagulant chart and her hands were still steady, and she thought about how that was the strange thing, how she had expected to feel more frightened, and mostly what she felt was focused. Rafferty's people moved on Sedgwick at 4:47 in the afternoon, between the physician's sign-off rounds and the shift change in the parking structure attached to the building. Lennox was not there for that part. She did not ask about the details, and none were offered to her. What she knew was that by 5:15, Vale's phone had received something. She could tell by the change in the energy of the room when she came up to check his 6 o'clock medications, and that by 5:30, Rafferty had come out of room 712 and told her, simply, "It's handled." "Breck," she asked. "Being handled," he said, which was a different answer, and she understood the difference. She nodded. She finished the medication check. She updated the nursing notes. On her way out at 6, she stopped in the doorway of room 712. Vale was sitting up. He looked, and this was something she had not seen before. Tired. Not in the physical way of a man recovering from kidney trauma. In the other way, the way of someone who had been carrying something for a long time and had just been reminded how heavy it was. His creatinine, he said, without looking up from whatever he was reading. "What's the real trajectory now that you've corrected the doses? It should stabilize within 48 hours, she said. Then start coming down. You'll probably feel it as improved energy within the week." He was quiet. "Miss Breyer," he said. "Yes. Why did you come to me first?" "This morning. You could have gone to administration. You could have called the pharmacy board's hotline. You could have documented it and let the system handle it." She had asked herself this question. She had asked it in the elevator on the way up that morning, and she had kept asking it through the day, and she had not stopped asking it just because she already knew the answer. "Because the system on this floor isn't designed to protect patients," she said. "It's designed to protect the floor, and you're the floor." He looked at her then, really looked at her the way he hadn't quite done before, not the assessing look, not the categorizing look. Something less guarded. "That's a very clear-eyed thing to say about the situation you're in," he said. "I'm a very clear-eyed person," she said. "It's occasionally inconvenient." Something passed through his expression that she didn't have a category for yet. "Go home, Miss Breyer," he said. "You've been here since 6:45. "I know," she said. "I'll be back at 6:45 tomorrow." She left the way she always left, through the stairwell. Not the elevator, because the stairwell was quiet and she needed 4 floors of quiet to decompress from whatever the 7th floor was doing to her nervous system on any given day. She pushed through the door at the ground level and stepped into the Miami evening, the heat still thick at 6:30, the sky going orange and pink over the bay, the city making its particular noise of traffic and music and water. She stood on the sidewalk for a moment. She had corrected a dying man's medications using falsified procedure, identified a conspiracy inside a hospital that didn't officially exist, and spent the afternoon pretending she didn't know what she knew in front of a man who had been trying to kill her patient. She thought about calling her mother. She thought about what she would say. She decided against it. She walked to her car, and she drove home, and she made dinner, and she set her alarm for 6:15. The 7th floor would be there in the morning. So would Ronan Vale, which was, she thought, the point. 3 weeks later, his creatinine was 1.1, normal range. She walked into room 712 at 7:02 in the morning to deliver the lab results in person, because that was not standard practice, and she did it anyway. He was reading again. He was always reading. 1.1, she said without preamble. He looked up. "That's normal," he said. "That's normal," she confirmed. He set down his document. He looked at the number on the printout she held, and then he looked at her, and then he said, "I don't generally owe people things." "I know," she said. "I find it uncomfortable, I imagine." "What do you want, Miss Breyer?" She had thought about this too. She had been thinking about it for 3 weeks, in the stairwell, in the workroom, in the parking structure, on the way to her car at the end of days that were longer than they used to be, and more complicated, and, if she was being honest with herself, clear-eyed, as was her nature, more real. "I want to keep doing my job," she said. He considered this. "That's all. That's all," she said. "But I want to do it right, which means if something like this happens again, if I find something wrong, I need to know that bringing it to you isn't going to get me buried." He was quiet for a moment. You're asking me to protect a pharmacist who will spend the foreseeable future finding my operational irregularities, he said. I'm asking you to protect the person who is keeping you alive, she said, which I think is a reasonable request. Ronan Vale looked at her for a long time. Outside, Miami was doing what Miami always did, loud and bright and relentless, the bay glittering through the window like something that didn't know how to be still. Rafferty will update your clearance, he said. It was not a warm answer. It was not meant to be. It was simply true, and that was. She had come to understand how he operated, not in warmth, but in the specific gravity of things that were real. She nodded. She put the lab result on his tray table. She left. In the stairwell, 4 floors down, she allowed herself exactly 1 moment of stillness. 1 breath held, then released. Before she pushed through the door and walked back into the work she was good at, in the building that didn't exist, on a floor that operated by different rules. Her hands were steady. They had been steady all along.